Whether your business is small, medium, large or extra large, there's a retirement solution for every type of business. oldmutualsuperfund.co.za.
Welcome back to our budget analysis. We still have our tax panel here at the desk. Andrew Wellstead from Norton Rose, Rob Stretch from Ernst & Young, and Professor Jackie Aronser from Wits University. So just to finish off there, Rob, with the carbon tax issue, you had a point?
Yeah, just around the emission taxes on motor cars. One of the problems you've got is that the quality of our grade of our fuel in this country is so low that we can't use those more fuel efficient engines in South Africa. So it's a catch-22 that we're paying this tax, but we're not getting any better grade of fuel to be able to improve on where we are.
Yeah.
So that raises the issue as to where's this money going and what is it being used to? Is it just going into a big black hole, or is it going to be used for a specific purpose?
And that question I asked about exemptions, how important is that, Andrew?
Look, while we got more detail, I said we got more detail than we thought. There's been a couple of draft papers on carbon tax, and there hasn't been that much progress. We certainly haven't got enough detail about exactly who's going to be exempt, in what circumstances. So my guess is that we're going to get another policy paper, maybe for discussion, to see the real nuts and bolts of the tax and how.
Well, I can just see the debate developing. Should we exempt Eskom's power stations completely because they've already had 16% every year for 5 years, and the price of electricity has gone up by 1,000% in whatever time. Jackie and the others as well, all of you, Rob and Andrew, I want to ask you, if you were listening to the panel before, Alicia's panel, they were saying we are relieved that there's been no increase in personal tax. In fact, there's been some relief. No increase in corporate tax. If he'd put in a wealth tax, a super rich tax, a windfall tax, wouldn't have been surprised. There doesn't seem to be anything like that. A lot of the other stuff is technical and good intention stuff about retirement savings and so on. So where's this extra revenue going to come from that he said he would need?
Well, I wish we could find it, and identify it easily. I think it's not that easy to say, apart from saying that the debt is obviously there. And that is the worrying thing, is our level of debt. And it's not at a worrisome level right now, but I think one has to be careful that we don't see this debt rising and never really coming down over an extended period of time, which could land us in a situation where we do become too highly indebted for our own good. So I think that's a concern. There are also areas, of course, although we didn't see an increase in tax rates on the wealthy, and I think that was a huge relief to all of us, but there have been amendments to tax legislation over the last few years which do result in some of the people at the high end paying more tax. For example, the medical aid deduction and so on will result in them paying slightly more tax, but that's certainly not going to yield a massive amount to cover the sort of deficit that we're looking at.
Yeah, there appears to be no big slice of income that wasn't there before.
I think he's taking a fairly conservative view, and he's saying, look, let's not panic, there's no knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about increases in tax rates or wealth tax, changes in VAT rates, etc. And he's saying, let's look at this thing over a period of time, a 3, 4, 5 year horizon. So I think with what they're relying on is the growth in the economy picking up and the revenue collections from that. I think they're also relying on, to some extent, with the Tax Administration Act, where there are some horrendous penalties and interest provisions, that will give them more collections. And I think even though they're giving back 7 billion to individuals, it's mainly going to those in the lower income tax brackets, and you'll find that those in the upper brackets are probably going to be worse off because of the so-called bracket creep or fiscal drag. Yeah. So I think that's what he's relying on. But it's great that he hasn't had a knee-jerk reaction to.
And as you say, the compliance thing, every time the screwdriver is pushed in further, the pliers are tighter on you.
We're seeing it more and more with interest and penalties, and to the extent that the administration system or the enforcement system is just going straight into companies' bank accounts and taking the money out.
And there are things like, even if if you make a mistake in good faith, tough. You've got to not make mistakes. They'll tax you on those things. Andrew, where's this money going to come from?
I must say, we obviously, you get called upon to make budget predictions. We said there wouldn't be any tax increases, and the reason being we had the luxury of seeing the President's State of the Nation address. And what both the President said and the Minister is that there's going to be a commission appointed to review the tax system, policy and base. Now, it wouldn't be, well, we thought it wouldn't be a prudent idea to have that in mind. You're going to appoint a commission of, I suppose, experts to look at the system, look at policies, look at the tax base, and then introduce what could be sweeping and controversial changes. So that's point one. There is going to be a commission later that's going to re-look at the whole tax system.
And they're not going to reduce taxes?
They're
Are
not
they?
going to reduce taxes, certainly not. But the good thing about it, and I think to be fair, it was always Minister Manuel's approach and it's Minister Gordhan's approach, very measured approach to these things. Very little panic despite what's happening in other ministries within the government. The second thing though is the economy is still under pressure. And we've got a small tax base in South Africa. And that is in the back of the legislature's mind that if you increase tax rates too much, you just squeeze that the tax base that you've got too hard. And that actually retards economic growth.
Yeah.
So for those two reasons, I think they did the right thing not increasing taxes because they're going to look at things going forward and because of the pressure on the economy. We're trying to get the economy going. We're trying to stimulate growth.
Jackie, we forget sometimes that under Trevor Manuel, tax rates were reduced quite substantially in some areas, and that was an incentive for more spending and so on. Are we, if you look at this overall, on the one hand, and there's a whole debate about we're taxed for things which we don't get in terms of service. So if you look at your monthly tax bill, you're probably paying 60% of your salary rather than 40% in terms of education, health, security
Sure.
that you don't get.
Yeah.
How, in terms of this context, in the global context, in South Africa now, how good is this in a taxation sense? How well have they done?
Well, I think they've done quite well under the circumstances. Of course, the concern is we still have a deficit, but if you compare internationally, most countries in the world right now are running on a deficit. So that in itself, I don't think is a cause for alarm. The balancing is there, and I think the key thing is we're seeing a lot of focus on government spending and corruption and so on, and the promise that action is going to be taken in that area. Because with the budget, it's got to balance at the end of the day, or come as close as possible to balancing. So if you don't have an upside on the revenue, then you've got to cut your expenditure. And I think we need to look very carefully at government spending and maybe not cut it, but make sure it's really effective. And I think especially in terms of spending on education and things like that, where there is a lot of money allocated, but it's got to be properly spent and managed.
Well, the Minister admitted, as he always does, that there are problems in the expenditure. Money is rolled over. I think 47% was the amount of money that is spent at local and provincial level rather than national level. How good is this tax budget?
In terms of what
they could have done and all the things they have to balance.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good budget. I don't think he had any room to manoeuvre. You know, the economy is shrinking. We've seen all the job losses, etc. So within the confines of what he was dealing with, I think it's a fairly good budget overall. And as I say, he's taking a longer term view than simply a 12-month period.
Andrew, I wanted to develop the point you made a moment ago, and maybe there's the calm before the storm here. Says all the right things, tinkering here, tinkering there, good stuff. Mining taxes. I mean, at the moment, and we've been saying in the last couple of weeks that the government's almost been aiming at a target that's moved. It's aiming at the mining industry as it was in the mid-2000s when the boom was on, and the platinum companies in particular making lots of. Now they're not anymore. It's almost like the policy is now catching up. But down the road, miners are going to make more money again. And then there's windfall, super taxes. Sasol had that pressure a few years ago when they made huge profits. And the NHI. Now, there are issues around the implementation, but boy, that's going to cost a lot of money. So in a sense, are we at the calm before the storm?
I don't think so. Look, I must say, I hear what Rob says about being quite a good budget. I think it was an excellent budget. The global economy is still much where it was in recent years. What's changed though? We've had events like Marikana. There's been a lot of pressure on the minister that could have led to a knee-jerk reaction. We saw lots of predictions, increases in tax rate. It didn't happen because he keeps a calm head. And I think we should view this commission as a very positive thing. It's quite true that our tax laws are fairly old and perhaps outdated. And I view the commission as a calm, measured way to look at tax reform, which is possibly necessary. I think from the mining tax debate, we didn't get much clarity on where things are going. We still know that it's on the agenda, but we seem to have moved away from the nationalisation debate, which I think is positive, certainly. So we seem to be moving in the right direction. And instead of giving into knee-jerk reactions and possibly demands from other sectors or pressure groups, the minister has done, as he has done in the past, kept a level head. From a personal perspective as a tax practitioner, what I am heartened by is there's not too much big ticket items from a tax perspective this year. As tax practitioners, we've dealt with an enormous amount of tax change in the last couple of years that's been difficult to keep up with. And it seems to be a bit of a consolidation this year. Yes, there's some technical big issues that have been raised, but to me it doesn't appear to be the same volume that we're used to.
Jackie, are they getting the balance right in terms of, yes, we want compliance, but you can be too aggressive in your approach? And I know a lot of companies, as a journalist and broadcaster, sometimes I will ask a big company what they would like me to ask the tax people when I interview them. And they say, but don't mention our names because we'll be victimized. You put this forward, but don't say where it came from.
And so it's probably fair to ask me that question because I'm not a practitioner as such. I'm coming from an academic point of view. But from what I hear, the aggression is quite extreme. And so, yes, there is the aspect of compliance, and we fully subscribe to compliance, and the compliance must be there. But from what I hear from the practitioners, they are dealing with quite a lot of heavy-handed enforcement.
There was that concept of impermissible tax avoidance, ITA. It was quite a buzzword a couple of years ago. And what it's saying was, even if the law allows you to get round it, you shouldn't.
That's morally wrong.
Yeah. Well, but the lawyers can always find ways of contesting that, can't they?
Yeah, correct.
Do you think our regime, our authorities have tipped the balance too far in terms of tough compliance?
I think you'll find that revenue authorities globally are tough. What does concern me at the moment with our revenue authorities is that 2 years ago, I would have said that our revenue authorities are the standout government department in the country. Unfortunately, I have to say that my view, they've actually gone backwards, that there are some individuals in there, and it might be a small minority, who are taking the law into their own hands and interpreting the law in their own way, which we have seen a number of instances of. So my appeal would be to the Commissioner is to look at those elements and make sure that your staff are acting within the bounds of the law.
One thing we haven't talked about, which has always been something with the newspapers certainly give prominence to, Andrew, is the alcohol and the tobacco increases. Didn't seem to get much attention this time, 5 to 10%. I suppose more than that is excessive. Although hasn't the argument always been that people will smoke, they will drink, so actually it's a good place to raise taxes?
Yeah, I think we're used to the so-called sin taxes increase every year. The only surprise would have been if they hadn't increased. So they have gone up in the usual way, and there's no surprise. It is a steady form of revenue for the government because people will smoke and drink.
Well, we'll have to stop there. Maybe to sum up our panel's response is pretty favourable, pretty complimentary of the Treasury. However, some mysteries remain and some interesting things still to be unpacked. But thank you to our panel of distinguished guests: Andrew Wellstead, Head of Tax at Norton Rose; Rob Stretch, Director of General Tax and Capital Gains Tax at Ernst & Young; and Professor Jackie Arendse, who is Head of the School of Accountancy at Wits University.